So then we are back with more understandings from the Renewed Covenant, from the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation is from the original documents, the prophets of old from the time of Israel. And then regarding relationships and what the Messiah had indicated to do with their own people and their own relationships, how they should guide themselves through as being the set apart and then the elected during the time of the transition from the first service to the second service. Then we find during our days what so many laws were then imposed upon the people from areas when the Creator had nothing to do with those laws. So then there are lots of bondages people are bound themselves with, never intended it. So then people were born during the time of the deceit. Most of them regarding relationships, they were in fact born during the time. So then the best understanding at this moment is doing what Shaliach Shaul said regarding then the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, renewing the mind with the Torah. However, we remind ourselves of then what Shaul said regarding then the times and the seasons. So then a brand new understanding of the scripture, you begin then with the times and seasons. So you can then re-educate, or should say readjust your minds precisely what Shaliach Shaul said. There is no further explanation of what to do other than reading the instructions and then understanding what context then Shaliach Shaul was speaking. Because there are lots of work to do in the future, and there is basic understandings must be then read and then must be also used for their own relationships. But we understand the trade is coming, and they have to be prepared for the great coming of this huge system, and then shortly is going to be in place. So then they don't have to be bound by any kind of a religion and then try to conciliate what they do versus religion and vice versa when there is no link with those. They're trying to hold those together for so long and didn't work. That's why the people at liberty at the moment, so they should spend their time wisely and learn and then renew their minds with the instructions, so then they can help other people be in bondage with laws imposed upon them for no reason. Because then they realize they were lied to. They were absolutely lied. They concocted theories and crazy guidelines of their own imposing as laws. Because the guidelines from Shaul are very proper. Those are then encouraged. However, making laws of those guidelines is absolutely insanity. Because you don't take guidelines never given by God and make laws out of those. And then people being bound by those for no reason, it's torture. So people should dis-torture themselves from those and then understand what's coming on the market. And be prepared for those, because lots of families, lots of people, they are in debt and in trouble. They have to get their dues taken care of and paid for, and as long as we maintain our country as it is, in terms of a very quietly transition from then the first presidency and the second presidency, and then we can maintain this line to make sure then we receive the best benefits from what's coming in the future. Because the junkies are done away with. Every person on the planet should be acquainted with the holy instructions and understand the very basics, so they can line up themselves, so they understand what not to believe. Because they were deceived for a long time, and what was then set of guidelines became laws, and those laws then became imposed upon the people, and they became to be enslaved. So as long as they understand the basics of the instructions, they can release themselves from any responsibility as far as guidelines made laws. And then you understand it as then Shaliach Shaul intended it. Merely guidelines, optional as per your option or not. In terms of states or countries imposing laws, that's absolutely crazy. completely crazy, because God himself never imposed in any nation his holy laws. That's why he has chosen his own nation, and then they understand the instructions. As far as the others, there are guidelines for their choice, but they should not be made laws. So they can release themselves from the junkies and then prepare themselves for the new market coming in. But then for these, we must be wise and maintain this government as it is. Then when the time comes, we retrieve wisely, and then we rebuild our country, and then we go from there. And if people they have concerns, they report at the cities, and they get their answers, and then they resume work, because the world is going to be extremely busy for the next few years. Extremely busy. We're going to have a work for a lot of people, because at time of rebuilding, each person then would have a chance of do the work. A tremendous amount of work is going to be done in the next few years, and we must be prepared for it. So then religion is no part of your life. You have to rid of yourselves of those junky religions, and then make sure you understand the market, because that's what the Creator intended for you. For you to take care of the market, trade and numbers, and then so on and so forth. And then you should remind of what the Messiah did for you. So then you read his words, and you show up at the gates of the holy cities, often for an extra. Then you understand what goes on. But then you should be very concerned also with your friends. Make sure they have also the guidelines spoken properly, as Shaul had placed those in context, so then they understand. And the more you study the Torah, the more you understand the renewed covenant and the prophets, then the more people are going to ask you questions. So then Revelation, other areas of it can be expounded later, as then we understand at least these very basics. Then there are other kinds of relations with spirit, and then those types of symbolic understandings, but each of those, they have a specific meaning, and then they have a certain links. And then as we begin to study the holy instructions, and we understand Leviticus, and then the renewed covenant and the prophets, then we can localize ourselves with the proper Creator's time, as we are in 6012. So then we begin to understand from creation the number, 1,000 years, 2,000, and then 4,005, and then the end. And then we understand until the time of the end. Because as we understand the counting of 1,000, you begin then to relate as then the first. Because when you are born, you don't count yourself at 0 years. You count yourself as already 1 year. So some people say, oh, but is it not the 7,000 years then? No, because when the situation is taken care of, when a person is born, a person already counts the number of years by the first number. So if you were born in 70, in fact you were born in 69, because you already count 1 when you were born. So considering then some slack given the understanding of the instructions and the time and seasons, then we can adjust ourselves properly as then the calendar is showing. So we are truly at the end of this age, and per instructions we understand the prophecies are very close, and then the revelation is giving us the precise understanding of what's coming in the future, and we are discovering why then Revelation is so complicated. But those who would unravel, be thankful to Yahweh, because He has then showing how to read those scripture. So then we can relate to your friends and then show them how to read it, because when they are interested in reading it, you always learn another part of the prophets, as then people they study more often. It's always rewarding. Please stay tuned.